When you understand the law of emotional distance, you begin to realize that human connection is built not just on closeness, but on the rhythm of presence and absence. Every emotion needs contrast to exist. Just as light only has meaning in the presence of darkness, love gains depth in the presence of space. When you are always available, always answering, always showing up before he even asks, you unintentionally remove the mystery that fuels desire. You take away the breath between notes that makes the music beautiful. A man does not miss what is always within his reach. He misses what once felt close, warm, familiar, and now has space around it. That space becomes the echo of you. It makes him wonder, it makes him think, and it awakens something ancient inside him. The chase, the curiosity, the longing to bridge that distance again. When you begin to understand this law, you stop fearing space. You stop equating silence with loss. You begin to see that emotional distance isn't punishment, it's power. It's not about playing games or manipulation. It's about reclaiming your emotional rhythm. You give without losing yourself. You connect without overextending. You become a woman who gives light but never burns out. When a man feels your energy pulling away, not because of anger, but because you are rooted in self-respect, he starts to feel the vacuum your absence creates. That vacuum makes him realize how much of his emotional stability was tied to your presence. That realization doesn't come through confrontation or words, it comes through experience. He begins to feel what life feels like without your constant energy feeding his. This boundary isn't about shutting down or closing off. It's about balancing closeness with independence. It's about understanding that attraction is an energetic dance, not a static state. When you step back, you invite him forward. When you stop filling every silence with reassurance, you give him the chance to reach out. When you stop proving your love, you let him feel it through contrast. That distance allows his emotions to breathe, to grow, to deepen. Without distance, love suffocates under the weight of routine. With distance, it expands with appreciation. The law of emotional distance teaches that connection without balance leads to burnout, and desire without mystery turns into habit. When you master this, you no longer chase love, you magnetize it. You understand that your presence is precious, and when given too freely, it loses its power. You no longer fear stepping back, because you know that true connection cannot be lost through space, it is only revealed. When a man feels that your world doesn't revolve around him, but that you choose to share it, he begins to cherish it differently. That distance makes him reflect. It brings him face to face with his own emotions, his own yearning. It is in your absence that he realizes your value was not in what you gave him, but in who you were when you gave it. That is the magnetic truth of emotional distance. It teaches both you and him what real connection feels like when it's not taken for granted. The energy of self-respect is the foundation of every meaningful boundary. It's not about pride, ego, or superiority. It's about inner alignment. When you respect yourself, you create a vibration that speaks louder than words. It tells the world how to treat you, how to approach you, and how to value you. You no longer beg for recognition because your energy already carries it. Self-respect is not something you demand, it's something you embody. It radiates through your tone, your choices, and even your silence. When a man encounters a woman who values her time, her emotions, and her peace, he feels something rare. He feels her groundedness. That groundedness becomes magnetic. It's not born from arrogance, but from awareness, from knowing that you don't have to chase what is meant for you. You simply need to align with it. Every boundary starts within. It's not about saying no to him, it's about saying yes to yourself. When you stop overextending, when you stop justifying your needs, when you no longer lower your standards to make someone comfortable, you begin to rise in energetic value. That's when people start noticing a shift in you, even if they can't explain it. They sense the calm power that comes from someone who no longer seeks approval to exist. A man may not understand why, but he feels it. He feels that he can no longer walk carelessly through your emotions, that your presence requires mindfulness. You no longer offer your energy to fill his voids. You offer your energy as a gift, not as a survival tool. That distinction changes everything. When you move from neediness to knowingness, your relationships evolve. You don't chase validation, you radiate value. You no longer pour endlessly into connections that don't pour back. You begin to see that self-respect is not a wall, it's a mirror. It reflects to others the standard of love you hold for yourself. When you treat your own heart as sacred, others feel the sacredness too. A man begins to sense that your affection is not guaranteed by his attention. He realizes your emotions are not a playground for inconsistency. They are a temple where only those who honor you can enter. This quiet confidence becomes irresistible because it is not loud, it is not performative, it is felt. When you honor your own energy, you start to protect your emotional frequency. You stop responding out of fear of losing him and start acting out of respect for yourself. You stop shrinking to be understood and start standing in the fullness of who you are. That shift changes the dynamic completely. A man who once took your time for granted begins to notice the weight of your absence. He begins to value your presence because you value it first. That's the paradox of self-respect. It makes others respect you without you ever asking. It makes men miss you not because you're distant, but because your energy carries worth. It's the quiet knowing that you are whole, that your peace is your priority, and that anyone who wants access to your world must bring peace, not chaos. The boundary of access is one of the most powerful emotional principles you can ever learn because it determines how much of yourself you give and to whom. When you give unrestricted access to your emotions, your time, your energy, and your attention, you unconsciously teach others that they don't have to earn the deeper parts of you. You become emotionally transparent to the point of predictability, and predictability kills mystery. A man can't miss what he already assumes will always be there. But when you learn to regulate that access, not by withholding love, but by valuing your inner world, you shift the entire emotional dynamic. You become a woman who doesn't just offer her presence freely, but who invites it consciously. That invitation becomes precious, and in that preciousness, you create the space for longing to grow. This boundary isn't about playing games or acting distant, it's about energetic management. Every time you reply instantly, over-explain yourself, or comfort someone who hasn't earned your emotional depth, you drain your own power. You give him something priceless, your availability, without requiring emotional reciprocity. But when you pull back, when you stop over-giving and start observing, something changes. A man starts to feel the void of your emotional energy. He starts to realize how much he relied on your reassurance, your responses, your warmth. That realization doesn't come through words, it comes through silence. When you stop filling every empty space, that space begins to speak louder than any message you could send. The boundary of access is about emotional discipline. It's about choosing when and how to engage instead of reacting out of habit. It's understanding that not everyone deserves the deepest parts of you, especially someone who hasn't shown emotional consistency. When you limit your access, you are not rejecting connection, you are refining it. You are sending a message that says, I am open, but I am not available to everyone all the time. That quiet boundary creates an aura of value around you. It shifts the dynamic from you chasing his attention to him seeking your presence. You become something he feels lucky to have, not something he expects to always receive. When you master the boundary of access, you start to feel a new kind of calm inside yourself. You stop feeling anxious when he doesn't respond because your worth is no longer tied to his reaction. You stop explaining your silence because your stillness speaks for itself. And in that energy, he begins to feel what true loss feels like, not because you left, but because your energy is no longer there to comfort him in every uncertain moment. He begins to replay the times when your attention was effortless, and he starts to crave it again. This boundary creates emotional distance not as punishment, but as reflection. It gives him the space to feel, to miss, and to realize the depth of what he once had easy access to. And that realization plants the seed of longing that no amount of chasing could ever create. Silence and stillness carry a power that few truly understand. In a world that constantly urges you to react, to explain, to prove your side, there is something deeply magnetic about a woman who can remain calm and composed. When you withdraw your energy, not in anger or bitterness, but with quiet certainty, you create an energetic shift that a man can feel even from a distance. That stillness becomes a mirror in which he starts to see himself, his actions, his behavior. He begins to notice the space where your laughter used to echo, the warmth that once met him with reassurance, the energy that made him feel alive. Silence becomes your loudest statement because it forces reflection. It leaves no defense, no argument, only realization. When you practice the power of silence, you stop engaging in emotional tug-of-wars. You stop trying to explain your worth through words. You understand that true respect cannot be begged for. It is felt through absence. Stillness doesn't mean you no longer care. It means you care enough about your peace to protect it. It's the art of letting things unfold without your interference, allowing the energy to reveal what's real and what's not. When a man senses that your silence is not punishment but peace, it disarms him. He begins to miss the sound of your voice, not because you withheld it as a tactic, but because your silence now carries weight. Every moment you don't chase or argue becomes a moment he feels your detachment. And that detachment doesn't make you colder. It makes you more mysterious, more powerful, more unforgettable. Stillness is emotional control in its highest form. It's knowing that you don't need to rush to fix, explain, or demand anything. You've said what needed to be said through your actions, and now you allow the energy to speak for you. In this quiet state, a man starts to realize how much noise he brought into your calm. He starts to understand that your stillness isn't emptiness, it's confidence. You are no longer driven by the need for immediate resolution because you understand that distance and silence create the conditions for truth to emerge. It's in that space where he begins to replay everything, your words, your tone, your presence, and the weight of what he lost starts to sink in. When you embody silence, you hold your power close. You stop leaking energy into conversations that go nowhere, into arguments that only drain you. You start to feel grounded in yourself, centered in your emotions. That calm becomes irresistible because most people operate from chaos and reaction. Your stillness becomes rare and rarity creates desire. A man begins to feel that your silence carries wisdom, that your stillness is not distance but depth. He begins to understand that your peace is something he wants to be part of again, not because you demand it, but because he feels it in your quiet presence or your graceful absence. He begins to miss you, not just physically, but energetically, because you've mastered the art of letting silence do what words never could. When you stop seeking validation and begin embodying your own value, everything about your energy transforms. You no longer approach love as something to earn. You start living as though love already flows through you. This subtle yet powerful shift changes the way people experience you. You no longer look to a man to confirm your worth because you have already decided that you are enough. That decision, that deep self-recognition radiates from your posture, your tone, and your presence. It's the invisible crown that sits upon your energy. Validation-seeking energy always reaches outward. It asks to be seen. It tries to prove. It performs. But when you move into the energy of value, you turn inward. You no longer chase attention. You attract it effortlessly. A man begins to feel that difference immediately. He senses that your attention is no longer a guarantee, that your emotions are not given freely, that he has to rise to meet you. That's the power of the shift from validation to value. It turns you from the seeker into the standard. When you are living in validation mode, every interaction becomes a test. You overthink his messages, his tone, his timing. You give from a place of fear, fear of losing connection, fear of being forgotten, fear of not being enough. That fear makes you reactive, and reactivity always weakens attraction. But when you reclaim your value, you stop reacting and start responding. You stop overgiving to prove your loyalty and start giving because it feels aligned. You stop waiting for someone to choose you because you've already chosen yourself. That energy creates a calm confidence around you, and calmness is magnetic. It doesn't shout, it doesn't beg, it draws people in naturally. A man can sense it even in your silence. He begins to realize that your love is not something to be taken lightly, it's something to be earned. When you embody your value, your boundaries begin to enforce themselves. You no longer need to say much because your energy already communicates what's acceptable and what's not. You stop chasing clarity because you no longer live in confusion. You know who you are, and that knowing becomes the filter through which every relationship flows. The moment you stop needing his approval, you regain your emotional freedom. You no longer carry the anxiety of being liked. You carry the peace of being respected. That difference changes the entire frequency of connection. He begins to feel your absence more deeply because your presence once carried so much warmth, depth, and security. When that energy no longer surrounds him, he feels the void. It's not just you he misses. It's how he felt when he had your attention. The shift from validation to value teaches you that love does not require performance. It requires presence. It reminds you that your worth doesn't fluctuate based on someone's acknowledgement. It's a steady truth that doesn't need constant confirmation. When you live in that truth, you radiate emotional independence. You become the woman whose energy no longer depends on anyone else's opinion. And that energy, grounded, sure, self-contained, draws a man back, not because you ask for it, but because he feels that you are no longer waiting for him to define you. You've already defined yourself, and that self-definition becomes the very thing he can't stop thinking about. When you begin to redirect your energy inward, something powerful happens. You start to glow differently. The moment your focus shifts from chasing connection to cultivating peace, your presence changes. You stop looking outward for emotional fulfillment and begin nurturing the parts of you that were once ignored. You start to enjoy your own company again, rediscovering the things that make you feel alive. That inner joy becomes magnetic. A woman who is centered in herself, who has a purpose beyond someone else's attention, radiates an energy that naturally draws people in. You are no longer chasing love, you are becoming love. And that transformation is something a man can feel without you saying a word. He senses that you've reclaimed your attention, your time, and your power, and that realization makes him curious. He begins to wonder what has changed, why your energy feels lighter yet more distant, why you no longer seem bound to his validation. This principle is what makes men miss you forever. The magnetic pull of self-focus. It's not selfishness, it's alignment. You stop giving all your energy to fixing or proving, and you start investing that same energy into growth, creativity, and self-expansion. You become the woman who doesn't need constant reassurance because her joy is no longer dependent on how someone else behaves. When your life begins to overflow with purpose and meaning, you stop orbiting around him. Instead, he begins to orbit around you. He starts to feel the shift in gravity. The balance of power changes, not through force, but through presence. You are no longer emotionally available on demand, and that absence becomes deeply felt. He begins to miss your attention, your laughter, your care, but more than that, he misses how your energy used to make him feel. When you are deeply connected to your own path, you exude quiet confidence. You don't announce your transformation, you embody it. You show it through your consistency, your calm, your discipline, and your happiness. That steadiness creates an emotional contrast. He starts to see that your world no longer revolves around him, that your happiness has roots deeper than any relationship. That realization makes you unforgettable because it's rare. Most people attach their worth to others. Few build their worth within themselves. You become that rare energy, a woman who is whole on her own. And in that wholeness, your absence becomes powerful. When you're no longer waiting for him to notice you, he begins to notice everything about you. The magnetic principle of self-focus teaches that attraction is not about pursuit, it's about polarity. The more you pour into yourself, the more others feel drawn to you because your energy becomes radiant, not needy. You move from desperation to inspiration. Your peace becomes alluring, your confidence becomes intriguing, and your independence becomes irresistible. You become the kind of woman who doesn't chase what she desires. She attracts it by being in alignment with herself. And that is the moment he begins to miss you in ways he can't explain, because he's not just missing your presence. He's missing the reflection of his best self that once existed in your light.